Today, we are honored by having a couple of graduate students, Elon and Julia, from Hopkins Marine Station, Stanford University. And they're going to talk a little bit about their backgrounds, and then they're going to open this up to questions. We were fortunate enough to have some questions sent in ahead of time, but mostly we'd like to hear your questions, so feel free to ask away. And please give a warm Whalefest welcome to Julia and Elon.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our impromptu question and answer session. My name is Elon. I'm a graduate student at Hopkins Marine Station, and I think since we're such a small group of interested people, I think we're just going to keep it short. Each of us are going to talk a little bit about our backgrounds to give you some idea of our growing areas of expertise, and then we'll open it up to questions and allow you to drive the conversation however you see fit. So, I study open ocean food webs, and what that means is I study who eats who in the ocean, basically. And this slide here is showing a schematic of a general food web in the ocean. So we have primary producers. At the base, these are phytoplankton, right, plants of the ocean. And then we have primary consumers, or zooplankton. These are small crab larvae, copepods, little other crustaceans. There are mollusks like snails. There are worms. There are fish larvae, and these are primary consumers. They eat the phytoplankton. Then they are eaten by a really large diversity of small swimming fishes and crustaceans and squids. And this group, these mid-trophic organisms, which describe their position in the center of the food web, they support top predators in the ocean, like our friends the whales and tunas, and my favorite animal, the Humboldt squid. But our understanding of the dynamics of the variability in open ocean food webs is really skewed toward the base of the food web, the primary producers, and the top of the food web, these predators. And the reason that our knowledge is skewed is because primary producers live at the surface of the ocean, and when they're found in large abundances, they actually change the color of the water, and we can observe that color change from space. So there are satellites in space that can measure the color of the water, and that tells us a little bit about the density and sometimes even the size of the individual phytoplankton, the primary producers in that area. And we know a lot about top predators because we like to eat them. These are the tunas and the billfishes and the sharks. There are a lot of federally protected species like whales. So we have a cultural and economic interest in a lot of top predators. But we know relatively little about these mid-trophic organisms which support all of these top predators because they're difficult to assess. They're difficult to sample. They live in deep, dark waters, and we have a lot of trouble catching them, basically. So one group of them, or we can talk about mid-trophic organisms as micronectin, which just means that they're small, micro, but they're good swimmers. Nectin, that's a term you hear a lot in oceanography, is nectonic. These are strong swimming animals. So these are small, good swimmers. They're 1 to 10 inches long. And as you can see, these are a little squid in the center, several fishes, some amphipods, which are crustaceans, and gelatinous organisms. And we know really little about where they like to live, in terms of vertically in the water column or where geographically they live and how that changes through time. And it's important for us to understand a little bit about the variation in these mid-trophic, right, these micronectonic prey organisms, because whales and tunas and squids eat them. And if we want to understand changes in the distribution or behavior of these top predators, one thing that's really important to learn about is changes in the distribution and behavior of their food, which might dictate where top predators choose to go. So that's a little bit of a background of food webs. Julia?
Sure. Hi, again, my name's Julia. Thanks again for coming in on this beautiful sunny day to hear from some marine science grad students. And so my research,
Oops, sorry.
I work in marine conservation biology, and so I'm interested in the more big picture approach of how humans and the ocean environment interact with one another and how we can manage the ocean ecosystem so that we can continue to receive benefits from it, like sustainable seafood and the enjoyment of marine environments, as well as support livelihoods and jobs and being able to continue to get protein and food security from the ocean. And in particular, I'm interested in how do we manage fisheries in really dynamic environments like California, where we have upwelling currents. We also have big El Nino events. Some of you may remember that we had a really big El Nino event last winter. And that makes it really difficult to understand how to manage the system because it's always changing. And the way that we've traditionally approached marine management is using the same methods that we use on land, like, oh, we'll just close off this area, kind of like a national park. But that doesn't work as well in the ocean because things are always moving around and the animals that you're trying to protect are also constantly moving. And so my research has to do with working with fishermen and working with some of this environmental data that Elon mentioned, where we can take pictures of the Earth from space. We can take satellite images to see how the environment is changing and using that to figure out some win-win situations, what win-win solutions that work well both for the ocean environment and for fishermen. And so that's kind of a little spiel about our research, and we'd like to open it up to you guys to answer as best we can any questions that you might have about marine science or what it's like to be a scientist or anything else that's on your mind.
We have some questions that were submitted earlier, and if I may ask one, one of the people said, I've heard people talk about there is only one ocean. There are 5 oceans, or maybe there are 7 or whatever. Why are people saying there's only one ocean? So does that make sense? And could you address that, please?
So the question was that the person has heard that there's only one ocean, and traditionally we hear about several oceans, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Antarctic Ocean. What does it mean to have only one ocean? And the way that I think about this is we can even see on this map how much of the planet is covered by water, and that also, maybe this map doesn't show it as well, but this water is all interconnected. They all have all of these oceans. The Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean join together both in the Arctic and at the tip of South America. The Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean join together at the southern tip of Africa. And they're all interconnected through currents and through wind flows and the way that the Earth is turning. So a drop of water that is in the Pacific Ocean might have come from the Atlantic Ocean or the Antarctic Ocean. They're really all interconnected. And more importantly, what we do in one part of the ocean can have consequences all over the planet for all of the other oceans. So we might think of ourselves as being very far away from the Antarctic Ocean, but trash that we throw into the water in California can actually make it all the way down, all the way across the planet. So we think of the oceans as being all entirely interconnected.
Yeah, and can I? I'll add a little something to that. So Julia's exactly right. There's none of these ocean basins that we refer to as oceans, right? The Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, there aren't actually barriers between them. And we have an interesting, so this is just a map showing currents in the ocean, major ocean currents. So the yellow arrows show general surface water movements. And so there are physical barriers to smaller animals in the ocean that can't swim, but a lot of the times you have waters that go to the North Pole or just into temperate latitudes wherever you are on Earth, and they get cold and they sink, and that sinking water creates the ocean conveyor belt. So you have water moving between all of these ocean basins. So I think it's right to say one ocean from many respects, include biological and social.
That's terrific. Great answers. We really appreciate it. We've got someone who has a question
Can you tell us what's going on with the Humboldt squid? About 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, we had them in here, and there were tons of them, and they were 20, 30 feet long.
20, 30 feet long? That's like this big.
Oh yeah, they went the length of the stage.
They're amazing. A little something about the Humboldt squid. So that's the main study organism of my lab, of the lab that I work in. And they are a fascinating creature, and let's maybe just go back to the picture of them so you can see. That's the squid on the right. So one of the reasons they're so cool is because they exhibit this plasticity, this variability in their life history, meaning how quickly they grow, how much they grow before they mature and can reproduce, and where they're distributed. So you brought up, oh, sorry, the question was, tell us something about the Humboldt squid and why they're not in California right now when they were here in 2012. And that's a main question of my lab, is trying to understand, okay, they seem to come to Californian waters periodically, and when they come here, they disrupt the hake fishery by eating hake or scaring the hake away. And one of the ways that we assess the hake fishery in terms of understanding how much we can take from it is you use scientific sonar and assess the biomass of hake in the ocean. And squid and hake look very similar on sonar, and so you can confuse the estimates of how much hake there is in the ocean. And actually, I have a great figure for this that I'm just going to pull up because I just spent some time making this. And it is, so basically we think that okay, so we think that they spend some time in warm waters. When their native habitat in the Gulf of California or closer to the equator becomes warm, they mature at a smaller size, which means they don't get very large, and they need to grow large to swim. To be able to swim up here, they have to be large. Let's just go back here. So we think that when the Gulf of California and their habitat that's closer to the equator is warmer, like it's been over the last 6 years with the 2009-2010 El Nino, and then we had a warm climatic event that was referred to as the blob in this area, right, this warming in the North Pacific, and then we had another El Nino in 2015-16, and we think that that stops them from getting large enough where they live further south so that they can't swim up here and be in the California current. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is, have you ever studied ocean noise pollution, and what have you discovered? And I have two questions. And the second one is, with the sonar that you use to study, was that damaging at all to the marine animals?
That is a great question. So there were two questions. The first one was, have we studied ocean noise pollution, and if so, what have we found? And the second one was that I mentioned that we use scientific sonar to assess the density and distribution of things in the ocean, like hake, and is that dangerous for animals? And it's a great question, and I actually just brushed up on this yesterday because I was thinking that myself. And what I've found, not research that I've done personally, but that Jeremy Goldbogen, who was just here a couple of hours ago, and his colleagues and other people have shown that the frequency that is disturbing to whales, I guess is a good species of interest, is a termed mid-frequency. So it's a lot lower, it's a lot deeper of a sound than what we're using in the ocean to, like echo sounders on fish boats, like fish finders use a higher frequency than we know currently can be heard by whales. So it's something, I think it's in the low hertz to the low kilohertz, so it's like from 1 to 10,000 hertz is the frequency range that we can hear, and closer to the 10 kilohertz and a little bit lower is what is used by like the what has been shown to disturb whales and has been associated with stranding events. So I think there's a lot of information about that, and actually there's a lot of interesting work going on to study more about that. And I think there has been a large increase in the amount of ambient noise in the ocean, which is like boating and activities that are human-based activities in the ocean. And we don't really know the effects necessarily of that. Or I don't, and I don't think too many people in the field do, but it is an area of interest, right? Because we like whales, and we would like to know how our activities, either military or commercial or recreational, affect them. So there's definitely a lot of work going on, but the frequencies that have been shown to bother whales are lower by orders of magnitude than what we're using to like look for hake in the ocean. Cephalopods, do you mean like whole cephalopods or the whole group? Okay, the question was, do I study cephalopods, the whole group? And no, I would like to say yes, because they're amazing, and don't get me wrong, whales are pretty cool and they're beautiful, but cephalopods are also very cool. I think more cool, right? They change the color of their skin, they change the color of their skin. They can reproduce when they're a foot long or when they're 6 feet long, depending on the temperature of the water and how much food you give them. So I just study some squids, some cephalopods, mostly squids. But I'm interested in the role that they play in ecosystems, right? So when we were looking at that food web with these mid-trophic organisms, a lot of squids fall in that center of the food web. They're really important prey for lots of things in the ocean, and they eat lots of things in the ocean. So cephalopods play really central roles in open ocean and coastal ecosystems. They're awesome. Check it. You should keep on keeping on with cephalopods. They're the best.
Julia, or hopefully obviously, but I'm wondering, Julia, can you tell us what the dangers are of desalination, that type of thing? And if there's too many to talk about, just point a few out.
So weighted.
The question was, what are the dangers of desalination plants? This is not something that I have done a lot of research about, and so I'm not an expert in desalination plants. But one of the concerns is that if you're taking a lot of ocean water and then removing the fresh water for us to drink and then dumping the very salty water back in, that water might be too salty for some of the marine organisms. And especially if we're injecting that into the very deep ocean, where there's usually animals might grow very slowly, there could be impacts on them that we don't even understand because we don't know that much about the deep ocean. But the extent to which those effects might be felt by marine organisms, I think, is not that well studied. Do you have more to?
No, I think that it's. Yeah, I think I also don't know much about it, so maybe commenting isn't the smartest thing. But I guess I have one thing to add, is that the ocean is very big. So while we should definitely understand the impacts of inputting hypersaline, so very salty waters, back into the ocean is very large, and we might expect, especially along the California coast, where you have this upwelling, it's a very dynamic environment where there's lots of mixing, that it would be interesting to look at how much hypersaline water you'd have to put in for there to be a negative effect, because you're going to have really rapid dissolution of that. Yeah.
So with some waters getting warmer and different species moving into warmer waters, have you guys done any research to forecast the kind of species that would move in that are not here right now, like going forward?
Yes, the question was, with warming waters and changing environmental conditions, and that we know that a lot of animals in the ocean respond to temperature changes in the ocean, has there been research to forecast how these animals will be moving with warming waters? I don't personally do that research, but there is a professor at Hopkins Marine Station, Barbara Block, and a whole team of researchers that is a collaboration between NOAA, between the government, and also between universities, where they've been able to put tags, satellite tags, onto some of these animals like tuna or great white sharks or sea turtles, and to see where they move in the water. And then they can overlay that with satellite imagery of what temperature that water was to see what their habitat is. And they were able to, with this huge data set of a ton of different animals, say, yes, probably we'll be seeing species moving north or toward the poles, trying to follow colder water because colder water tends to have more food in it, and that we might be seeing more tropical species coming up. So for example, during this big El Nino we had last year in Santa Barbara, they were seeing hammerhead sharks and sea snakes, which are very traditionally tropical species that you wouldn't see in California. So the thought is that we might be seeing more patterns like that in the future.
Now, someone had submitted a question about the coast deteriorating. That doesn't sound like it's something that you would research or are researching right now because you're more involved with the organisms of the ocean. Or you can correct me if I'm wrong. But would you care to comment on the benefits or a lack of benefits in building a seawall to protect specifically the end of the peninsula, Pacific Road?
It's a very interesting question. This is like...
The question was about coastal deterioration and if there'd be benefits of building a seawall on the Monterey Peninsula. Also something I'm not an expert in. I would argue we used to have a seawall, and it was the sand dunes. We have the coasts have natural barriers to protect the inland from waves and from storms, and our sand dune system does an awesome job of that, especially when it has native plants that are able to hold the sand together. But when you bulldoze over those sand dunes to build a hotel, or when those native plants are disrupted by invasive species like ice plants, then the sand dunes aren't as powerful. And so the water can even just come right in if you're disrupting those sand dunes. I'm not sure if there are plans to build a seawall or whether that would happen. Usually the concern with seawalls is, one, that you're doing a lot of construction on fragile coastal habitats, and that also that disrupts the natural flow of sand and of organisms. So for example, in some places like Hawaii, if they've built airports or long breakwaters, that's been very disruptive in the natural flow of sand that happens all the way down the coast, and that can have impacts by moving different species around or preventing the movement of species to the homes that they want to return to.
That's a great answer. Elon, do you have
Sure. I think Julia did a great job. The only thing that I would add is that also sometimes putting in seawalls or other types of structures like jetties or what have you, again, change the flow of sand. And then if you are relying, like in Hawaii, to bring tourists to the area because of the lovely beaches, and there's a disruption of how sand gets delivered to that area seasonally, then you also have an economic burden of replacing sand to that area. So I think that this is a great question for all of us to go and Google ourselves later, and I bet you we'd learn a lot.
All right, terrific. I think we got another question.
Yeah, I got one for you, Elon. Hopefully you don't have to Google this one because it concerns squid. I'm talking about the squid we eat.
Oh, sure.
Around here in Monterey Day, we see the squid boats out a lot. Some summers, some years, they're all night long. And there are years we don't see any of them. Yet in the restaurants they serve us calamari all day long.
Yeah.
Are they cyclical? Do they come from other places? Or can we fish squid forever and ever? How do they work?
That is a great question, and the question was, we eat squid here year-round, right? You get served calamari in the restaurants, these lovely little rings of the California market squid, and where do they come from? Are they always from California? Do they spawn cyclically? Can we just fish them forever, was the question. And my answer is I don't exactly know. One of the reasons is because it seems like squid in general, and this, going back to young sir over here, cephalopods in general are semmelporous. That means they live fast and they die young. So they tend to grow fairly rapidly and reproduce in large numbers, and that allows them to respond really quickly to changes in their environment. And in our case, it means that there seems to be a large abundance of them year after year, with, of course, some exceptions. But the state of California hasn't put that much money into studying them because they've been so, they seem to have been very consistent, at least over on the scale of decades. Recently, they've been moving up the coast. They actually, the same species, this is the California market squid. It's in a different family than my friend the Humboldt squid. And there are populations of them in Washington and even Alaska and Oregon. And so they tend to move up and down the coast, and that sort of affects how much we can get. I'm not so sure about the fishery itself in terms of supply. Like, are we just eating squid that has been frozen in a good year? You'll notice that, so I moved here 3 years ago, and squid at the fish market were 99 cents a pound during squid season, which is dirt cheap. It's basically 100% protein, and 1 pound of squid was 16 adult squid, which fed me, a large human male, for a week, basically, for $1. And now it's $3.99 a pound. And the fishermen haven't been catching as much. And actually, another student in my lab is really interested in studying this, are these breeding populations of squid, so the squid that are in Monterey Bay, or is it the same population that just keeps coming back, or is there lots of dynamic movement of populations of the market squid all along the Pacific coast? Another thing, actually, that you'll see is here, calamari, right, just means squid. So when you get the small rings that are, the size of a quarter or larger, that's the California market squid, and they have the small, delicious arms. That's my favorite, the really crispy, stringy bits. But if you get a calamari steak, that's a big, thick piece of the body. That's maybe, half an inch thick. That's our friend Acidification, and it was probably caught in Peru or Chile and shipped in. Tasty, tasty treats, the squid, for sure.
We have, does someone have a question? Because here, good.
One more about ocean acidification, and could that hurt the squid, particularly the Humboldt squid, or the California market squid?
The question is a concern for ocean acidification and what the effects of ocean acidification might be on the Humboldt squid or the market squid or other creatures in general. Do you want to start with this one? Or?
What does the Humboldt squid eat? Do they eat calcifying organisms?
They do not. They don't eat pteropods, as far as I know, which are these lovely sea butterflies, shelled snails of the open ocean pteropods. If you want a beautiful image to see before you go to sleep, check out pteropods. They're so cool. Okay, so ocean acidification, right, is this idea that, or it's not an idea, it's a phenomenon that the ocean is becoming more acidic. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere diffuses naturally into the water, and it reacts with water to form a bicarbonate, a base, and protons, right, which we measure as increased acidity. And the main effect that this has been having on open ocean ecosystems has been it's been making organisms that create shells out of calcium carbonate more difficult to pull calcium carbonate out of the water, and it's been in some cases dissolving species' shells. But for fishes, it's also been shown to disrupt their sense of smell, disrupt their ability to detect predators or prey, and I'm sure that there are, it might affect oxygen binding and how just their resting metabolism, how good they are at pulling oxygen from the water, which they need to produce ATP, right? This energy blocks in our cells and our bodies. For squid, it's unclear. They don't have hard parts. They have proteinaceous hard parts, right? Their pen and their beak, which is a matrix of protein and water. They do have calcium carbonate ear bones. Well, bones. They're analogs to fish bones, the otoliths, which are contained in these balance organs. So basically they have a big organ inside their head that is a sphere lined with all of these different hairs, and there's a stone in it that's made out of calcium carbonate. And because of gravity, the stone sinks downwards, right towards the center of the earth, and it depresses these hairs, and that's how the squid knows which way is down. And so perhaps it might affect them by making it harder for them to build those ear stones as they grow. But otherwise, maybe it'll affect them through their prey or prey of prey, right, in a food web sense, where if the prey of their prey is hurt, then you might have some sort of cascade up the food web in terms of either reduced food or a shift in what predators can eat, right? So let's actually go back to this. Oh. Yes, so I'm sure it will affect them in some ways. What a dynamic, wonderful place the ocean is.
All right, well, you all, I know you're studying, focusing on certain things, but you have a wonderful knowledge of all things ocean, and we thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
This is for you, and then you got to get your computer. Thank you so much.
Thanks very
And
much.
this is for you. So go ahead.
Oh, awesome. So feel free to, both of us work at Hopkins Marine Station. There's a public outreach office, sort of. Julie, are you still one of the contact people? Oh, so there's an email on the homepage somewhere for Hopkins Marine Station. If you have more questions, feel free to email us. We're going to be having an open house on May 6th, so if you're around, feel free to come by. We're happy to chat with you. Cephalopods are the best because they feed whales. One of the things they do.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming in, and thanks for your questions.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot.